Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. Today, it's just me and you, folks, as I'm going to talk about our first exposure to the Commanders in the OTA practice on Tuesday afternoon. So, got a lot of stuff from there just to kind of go over some impressions of some players that we haven't seen for a little while and some we just saw a couple of days ago. Anyway, but there's one little nugget of news that the Commanders had on Tuesday. They released quarterback Jake Fromm. No surprise when they drafted Sam Hartman. You knew, like, at the very least, they're competing for that, and that was the guy that they chose. They did not choose Jake Fromm. They inherited Jake Fromm. So they released Jake Fromm. They also chose Jeff Driscoll, who is also in competition for that number 3 spot behind Marcus Mariota and Jaden Daniels. So again, not a surprise there at all. And they saw enough from Hartman in the rookie minicamp to say that, and listen, they gave him a good bonus and they have there's guaranteed money there. It wasn't prohibitive. So you didn't have to do that, but they like what they saw and they like what they heard and saw from Hartman throughout the draft process. So he then becomes certainly a guy that would take the Fromm spot, whether it's on practice squad or whether it's as the third quarterback on the 53-man roster. So there you go. Today, or as I record this on Tuesday, you can see I'm still in the bubble. A rainy day out here, folks. It wasn't supposed to be this wet, but it was. It was kind of an off and on drizzle, but they were able to practice outside. So it wasn't like this pouring downfall, something bad, just a light rain and off and on throughout most of the 1 hour plus practice. So a couple of things. One, going to get into some Jaden Daniels, some Emmanuel Forbes, just some receiver stuff, a lot of other stuff. But one of the things too, to start with, the hype video or the little hype drill at the start of practice, wasn't sure if they're going to do it, the veterans or not, but they did. And I think it's, I always wonder what a veteran's going to feel about that. Like when you're doing that, it's Zach Ertz, it's your 12th year or whatever it is, and you're doing all this stuff before an OTA practice, but they're going to do it. And they did it today, and it was a little more than a minute, and they seemed to enjoy it. And one thing that Cliff Kingsbury, we talked to him after the practice, he said that if he becomes a head coach again, he's going to incorporate that drill because he's one of the more active guys in this, but he feels like it provides a lot of energy to start the practice. Now, all this stuff is great. It's still going to go as far as number 5 can take them, but it does provide more energy. And I've told you, like, that's the vibe in the building, is there's more energy in there. And I think a lot of it stems from Dan Quinn. It's what he emphasizes. It's who he is, but it's also what he looked for in his assistant coaches, which is why you have a bunch of former players on this staff. And I think that kind of lends itself to that. So one of the first things I did today, watch some of the receivers. They were working on their blocking. Now, they've worked on that in the past. This is not something new. You always work on it. There was certainly an emphasis on it to start the practice today when they're doing their individual drills. But I'm bringing it up because to me, it's going to be a bigger part of the demand for what they have to do this year. I didn't think that it was, while they may have worked on it, were they as demanding about the execution of it as they needed to be? Because I'll be honest, like De'Ami Brown, I think he's a good blocker. I think everybody else was kind of inconsistent, including Terry McLaurin. I think he had to be a little bit more consistent with doing that aspect of it. But when you watch them, you're engaged with it, and they're working on, like, they have the receivers initially stand about a yard away from a guy holding a bag, and just kind of explode up into them. Then they would have them from about 5 yards away, and then work on breaking down about a yard and a half from them as Bobby Ingram, the receivers coach, would say, closing the cushion and getting to about a yard and a half, getting in position and then striking. So that way you're not overrunning it or you're going into them with the proper strength to make an effective block. And then the last one was they're about 10 yards away or so, and it was a mirroring drill. So the guy holding the bag would kind of go left to right, and the receiver would kind of go with them. Then they would just say strike, and so he'd fit the block, right? So those are the things they're working on. But again, they've done it in the past, but I didn't feel like they had really good. I didn't think the receiver blocking overall was exceptional, and that's how you get your long runs, to be honest. Like you watch a Kyle Shanahan team, they get those long runs, but you watch the receivers that he gets, they do a good job blocking. And I think it has to be emphasized more that they have to do that here. So good to see that. But again, it's something that they've done in the past. So anyway, one of those receivers that I talked about him the other day, Kaz Allen, I do think he's doing a better job catching the ball. I'll be curious to see how he looks this summer, but I like the early part of it. Just, we already know he's a quick guy, but I feel like he's been so far in the three times now we've been able to see him. I do feel like he's catching the ball better. Perhaps, and again, it's not a surprise given that he was still relatively new to the position last year and just learning how to catch the ball the proper way, et cetera. But he's doing a better job so far. Quarterbacks, they're doing a lot of the target throws with those nets. And I've told you before, they have the 3 blocks, kind of runs diagonal down. So you have top left, middle, bottom right. And when you're looking at it from behind. So when they're looking at it, it's top right, middle, bottom left. But they're doing a lot of work with that to improve the accuracy. A lot of emphasis on the footwork and throwing from different angles and stuff, which is good for a guy like Jaden Daniels because first of all, that's what he does. But secondly, that's what it's going to happen. Like that's when you're an athletic quarterback, you're going to put yourself in position where you've got to make those off-target throws. Again, not that it's revolutionary teaching here, but it's something that's going to pertain to these guys. And I will say in the target stuff, Daniels is pretty good. I think he's done overall. Now that's 3 days we've been able to watch him do this. I feel like he's pretty accurate throwing and those targets. And, they'll do a lot of footwork drills, kind of going around cones. And then the coach will say, hey, throw it to 2, you throw it in the middle or wherever they throw the targets. He's done a good job with that. And I think some of that is, I think he's a very relaxed thrower. That I think helps the accuracy for sure. Also has good footwork and a good quick release. So, that's all good to see. By the way, his first pass in a 7-on-7 was intercepted by cornerback James Pierre. It was a pass to Kaz Allen. So the 2 guys I just talked about did not connect on the first time in the 7-on-7. Do not overreact. And I don't think you are. One of the things, and, I like to watch, like, as we get going into OTAs and especially training camp, like I like watching training camp practices to see the subtleties of what guys do. One of the things, and just like, and this is just a minor thing, you're always warm up, but like Terry McLaurin, watching him warm up during the special teams portion. So he and Ingram are just kind of throwing to the side and he's working at catching the ball away from him. And then also working at catching the ball on the sidelines and getting the toe drag. Little things that just kind of get you back in the mindset and just reinforces the habits of doing those kind of things. 2 things I haven't mentioned yet about some of the rookies. Jordan McGee, the linebacker, it's a big dude. Like, dude has some guns, and he's a big, not big, and like he's just looks physically really strong. And so we'll see what that means. But that's one impression of him, and he's going to be a guy that I think will factor as much in some of the blitz packages if he gets to that point. I think that's where he could help. They mentioned coverage. When I saw him a little bit in coverage, looked like there were times in zone coverages that maybe he wasn't quite as certain on. But I'll see what their plan is for him there. But a bigger dude, and then Dominique Hampton, the safety, also a big dude. But as a safety, especially, the reason why I even bring it up for him, because I think he's going to be a key factor as he develops as possibly a big nickel type player. You bring more size to that position. And one of the things with Cam Curl in the past, I know the previous coaches felt like he got worn down a little bit in that role, which is why they wanted to find somebody else who could help him with that role last year during the draft. Hampton has the size. I mean, he's a bigger guy. So he also had a pick today of Marcus Mariota, pass over the middle, nice break on the ball, and a good pick. Because these are the veterans, one of the guys that I watched a lot of more today up close was Emmanuel Forbes, because you want to see where is he at with his game. And I still think, like, give it time to see what is the impact of coaching on Forbes. Now, Forbes said, like, he liked meeting with the Dallas staff last year before the draft. Felt like Quinn and Joe Witt liked him. So, and they have, I know I had an interview with Tom Donatel, the secondary coach, back in the spring. I know he said some good things about Forbes as well, because they like the ball hawking. I mean, if you have a guy who can go get the ball That's what this team wants. So of course they were going to like that aspect, but he's got to clean up some of the other stuff because teams will pick on him if he doesn't. Little things. And, for example, his first pass I saw him go against was Olamide Zacchaeus, and little bit, I wouldn't say, I don't know, but lackadaisical is the word, but a little bit too much cushion. And when he, maybe a little bit too upright. So when Zacchaeus breaks and Forbes has to come out of the break, his first thing is to kind of lean back a little bit to brace himself and push forward. Well, that creates more separation. So one of the things I felt like last year was a little bit better on that, but I think some of it, and listen, man, I was standing next to Fred Smoot when watching this. So you get in kind of a PhD in corner play when you're standing next to him and you can listen to what he says. But I think one of the things that he talks about is just being a little bit lower in your stance to get that balance, right? I think the balance there is sometimes it was a little bit off balance maybe when he was trying to break. But I think that's something that, from Smoot's perspective, is staying low in your stance to allow yourself to get those quicker breaks on the ball and not lose any ground when you do so. But also that allows you then to close the gap. And there was sometimes a little bit too much cushion between him and the receiver. And this is not how, people always blame the coaches on the cushion. Sometimes that's on the corner, folks. And in these cases, that's what he's going to have to close, is work on closing that cushion a little bit. How can you do that and still be effective? That's what the coach's job is to get him to do. And I think they have, like I've told you before, this is a stronger defensive staff than we have seen in a while. So I think, if there's a staff that can get this out of him, I think it would be this one. We'll see, but they're going to have to. Anyways, after that one play I told you, next play, he's on the hip of Terry McLaurin on a crosser. Nice job, nice coverage. Ball goes elsewhere. Another time, a break by Luke McCaffrey. Again, good job with the cushion. Ball goes elsewhere. Another one I liked with him, McCaffrey comes off the line. Forbes' job is to jam him. Was a little bit more press. So he's get up there, he jams him, he rides him a little bit. And again, McCaffrey is not a factor in this play. And I bring that up because I'll go back to the first Philly game. There was a cover 2 that Forbes played where he had one play early in the game, good jam, and, receiver disrupted, blah, blah, blah. Ball goes elsewhere. Second time, a very soft jam, receivers not budged, gets the ball down the left side, I believe it was, and it's a big game because of it, because your job there is to be physical and to reroute. And if you're not going to do that, I don't think you're going to play. This group does not have to play him. Last group did because they drafted him, and you want to play him because he's a first-round talent. But this group isn't going to feel like that, I don't believe. So if you're not going to do that stuff consistently, then you shouldn't be on the field. But what the key is, he did it today. The first time I saw him have a chance, and he did it, and it was a really good jam of McCaffrey. So that was good for him. They did use Mike Davis a lot at that left side. So working a little bit, depth charts don't matter right now, but Davis was out there a lot. So if you're Forbes, you've got to win this job this year. You have to win this job. They're not going to hand it to you. So if he's out there, it's because he won the job or somebody else lost it or whatever. But I think, that's an important thing to note. Then finally, De'Ami Brown did drive off Forbes on another one. Again, needs to play a little bit lower in his stance and maybe react a little bit quicker because that be ready to pounce. And I think that's, one of the things that this staff, when you talk to people on the staff last year in the building, was you get used to playing those SEC quarterbacks, which are good. But then you look at the quarterbacks he played, it's a different ball game in the NFL. So you've got to work to close that gap. You can't rely on some of those quarterbacks to be off target. You've got the skill, you've got those instincts. Now you got to put yourself in position to better use them. And that's where the coaching has to help take him there. I say help. They alone cannot get him there. But he's got to be the driver, but they can be that support staff to help him get there. Davis is a long corner, and I think that's one of the things that jumps out. Did see there's one time, and this is, again, standing next to Smoot. I love talking to that guy. is there's one time where McLaurin's is the inside receiver on the left side. So there's an outside receiver, he's on the inside, and Smoot automatically, when he sees McLaurin going there, he knows that something's up with McLaurin. So, and the way the formation was set, it's like he figured it'd be be across. So he's basically saying, I'm Davis, I'm getting it, basically shading him inside, shade him inside. Sure enough, plays him straight up. McLaurin runs across her, open. Davis can't get there. Easy completion, Terry McLaurin. Again, I love standing next to Smoot. And finally, the catch of the day goes to McCaffrey. A diving grab in the back, and the same play I just told you about where it's another one where Forbes took a pass away. I think the crosser to McLaurin that he took away because he was on the inside hip. That same play was the one that resulted in McCaffrey making a diving catch in the back of the end zone. Just a really nice effort there. And even Cliff Kingsbury later said that with McCaffrey, every drill, he's going full speed. So whatever he becomes, he's going to max out because of it. Probably drive some guys nuts a little bit because of that full speed. Not everybody's going full speed during the OTA, during the spring OTAs for sure. But that's how that guy's going to, again, whatever he does, he'll max out because of that sort of mindset and behavior. Anyway, then after practice, we got to talk to a few players, going to talk about some of this stuff, including leadership in a future podcast. But talk to Zach Ertz, and he said one of the things that he likes about what he's heard from Dan Quinn is that putting ownership on the players. The coaches can help you. They're there to, and Quinn has said this, they're there to support them, but the players are the ones that have to decide how good do you want to be? What extra things do you want to do to help get you there? And he's talked about, he's been on really good teams. He's been on some teams that aren't so good. Said the hardest working teams he's been on are the ones that go the furthest. So like, that's the kind of stuff that you have to do. When Warren Sapp would come in here and he would work with the defensive line, one of the things he would talk about is like when they were in Tampa Bay, how they would, as a group, decide to stay after to work on various things. And I think that's something you're going to want to start to see more of if you really want to go somewhere. So those little things that you put in that get you there. And Ertz also said that, he certainly feels refreshed being here. I think just being in the energy that is here right now. And he said that every coach, it's not just Quinn, said every coach is bringing the juice. So there you go. Cliff Kingsbury talked about Jaden Daniels, of course. And a couple of things he kept saying he's very intentional about his plans for studying, how he goes about practice, his plan for practice. And he felt like that was a very encouraging sign for a rookie. Again, I've covered more than a few rookie quarterbacks here. You don't always hear that stuff about these players. I did not hear that about Dwayne Haskins. Really didn't hear that about, you heard a lot of things about what Robert could do, but I didn't hear that he had a plan for this. He had a plan for that. Robert worked hard very much off, and all the other stuff, and getting him being physically ready, etc. But I think the other parts of the game are the ones that can separate you and help you grow and develop as a quarterback. And I think that's why Jaden Daniels got better. And that's like Kingsbury, this is the first time we've talked to Kingsbury since they drafted Daniels. And one of the things, because, like he was asked about what he liked about him before the draft, or, it was clear to him, like, this was a pretty unanimous pick here. So for all the talk about like, what are they going to do? Inside the building, it was always very clear. I think it was very clear to a lot of other people too, around the league. But anyways, with Kingsbury, one of the things he brought up was being in Arizona and being there when Arizona State beat Oregon, led by Daniels. Now, was he an accomplished passer at that point? No. What he was a competitor. And like, that's something that jumps out to coaches in a big time way. And then you take that and you see how he improved, especially over the last 2 years at LSU. And that's when you feel like you can do something with that kid. So one of the things that he also talked about that Kingsbury did was with Daniels was, he talked about just like, I asked him something along the lines of, is there something where because of some of the work he's put in, because of some of this stuff, is there an area where you feel like he's ahead of where you maybe would have expected? And he said, yes. And it's in protections. And that is a really hard thing for rookies to learn, is handling the protection calls, understanding the protections, which is why you need a guy like Tyler Biadasz as a center to help with those, not just the calls, but the protections in general. But that's where he felt like Daniels was maybe ahead of the game. And you look back on what he experienced at Arizona State, but also at LSU, how many different defenses he would have seen. Like, go back and watch the Florida game where he had this monster game and look at the different kinds of things they sent at it, the different blitzes they sent at him. And so you have to become more accomplished in protection calls and protections as a quarterback in that league than maybe some others. So if you combine that with the talent, that's what you get. But that is, I think, it's something that's very hard for some rookies to get it to really master. And so if he's ahead of that in that area, that's a good sign for him and the team. By the way, during the 7-on-7, he mostly worked with, I guess you would consider like the second unit, if you're worrying about that, like that. And that's where you should put him, right? Make him at least, develop and earn whatever he's going to get. Mariota was more on one side working against more starter types. Whereas, Daniels was on the other side. Now, he did have Austin Eckler with him. Brian Robinson was on the other side. Jamin Davis was on the same side with Jaden Daniels. You had Wagner and Louisville on the other side. So, like, this stuff is like, again, it's a first OTA practice. I'm not going to get into depth chart stuff too much. So, anyways, but I do think it's important to talk about the protections and just what jumped out to Kingsbury. Finally, Jahan Dotson also, well, Forbes spoke today too. Didn't say a whole lot, to be honest. Did say he went against Daniels in college. One thing that jumped out to him was he can run. So, anyways, Jahan Dotson also went and said there's a completely different energy in the building. He said there are some really, really good vibes. I think that dude is going to feel very refreshed this year. I think I think it was a tough year for him last year. He also said of Daniels that that's the quarterback I wanted. Now, I know for some reason people took that as a slam on Sam Howell. He didn't say, I thought this back in January or whatever. The assumption, well, you can assume whatever you want, but he didn't say it was before the draft, it was this or that. But there were, as we know, there were quarterbacks they were deciding between in the draft. It's not like they're going to tell Jahan Dotson which one they're going to take, but he also knew Daniels from having worked with them before Daniels transferred to LSU. So clearly he liked him. But also, I think throughout this process, if you're looking at him, Drake May, Penix, and then JJ McCarthy, well, that's clearly the guy he wanted. Now, anything else, you're extrapolating info, and I don't know. I can't say, get inside his head to say, was that a shot at Sam Howell? I would simmer down on that, because I think that's, taking a leap there. But regardless, I do think Dotson I think he'll feel very refreshed with this change this year, whether it's just because of Cliff Kingsbury. And I think that swap there will help him. I think he's going to like that. I think that was a big change for him and some others too. But maybe it's just the vibe in general. But I do think, like, a lot of guys have mentioned that, and certainly Dotson did as well. And then he said about Kingsbury that he makes us feel comfortable. So now, again, you then have to go out and produce. If you didn't like how something was in the previous time, you have to go out and produce when you get more of what you want, right? And so I think that's the spot he's in. But I like Dotson still as a receiver. He's got a lot of skill. He can get open. And I think in the right offense, he can be a very effective receiver for this team. Again, he just seems happier. He said, one of the things he likes is that every day they walk in the building with a purpose. He said, everyone has a smile on their face and it's contagious. So all good things. But when it comes to September, it better pay off on the field. Always kind of qualify that, because you always, you're going to hear a lot of good things at this time of the year. And I think these are all legit. I do think they're legit. Like, anytime there's a coaching change, you're going to hear and see it. But I do think there's a little bit of a different vibe this time around. And some of it is, I think a lot of people are ready to move on from the past and just all the stuff they had to deal with over the last 4 years. But I also think that there's a different energy with this staff that filters down to the players. And I think they appreciate it. And I think there's just a renewed energy and maybe hope for some of these guys, but we'll see how that develops. Anyway, that's the OTA practice report for today. I'll be back on Thursday morning with another episode. So I'll talk to you next time.